Pakistan going to be?
Imran Khan captained Pakistan to victory in the Cricket World Cup in 1992. When he bowled his last cricket ball, he made his final runs. One of the world's best-known sportsmen retired to devote his time to social work. But politics came calling. Always a vocal critic of endemic corruption, Khan founded the party Pakistan Tehreek-e-Insaf in 1996. PTI's promise was to ensure justice for all. As party chairman, Khan won his first seat in the National Assembly in 2002. 6 years later, his popularity soared when he boycotted the election in principled stand against corruption. To the surprise of the political establishment in the capital Islamabad, hundreds of thousands of supporters rallied in Lahore and Karachi in 2011. After several political victories, his campaign appealing to the younger generation succeeded, with the promise of creating a corruption-free new Pakistan. Khan was sworn into office as the country's 22nd Prime Minister in August 2018. So, 2 years on, how's the fight against corruption going? How is he coping with the geopolitical changes? Has he turned the economy around? What about human rights and media freedom? And how he's managing Pakistan's response to the COVID-19 pandemic? Some of the questions we put forward as the Prime Minister of Pakistan, Imran Khan, talks to Al Jazeera. Pakistan's Prime Minister Imran Khan, thank you for talking to Al Jazeera. Prime Minister, 2 years now in power. Those who were watching you 2 years ago still remember the promises you made about clamping down on corruption, mismanagement, unemployment, falling debt, creating 10 million jobs, providing low-cost housing, sophisticated education services and health services. For many people, by the way, Mr. Prime Minister, you haven't so far delivered on those promises. Why?
Hashim, think about any economy in the world which faced similar problems what Pakistan faced. Huge deficits, external and internal. And then the power sector in serious trouble. No country can immediately snap its finger and everything, the reforms take place. It's a struggle. Moving the economy, reforming the economy is not an overnight thing. It takes time because, you know, the whole mindset, more incentive structure, and then you have to change the way government works, ease of doing business, incentivizing the right structures, the right sectors. It takes time. But in my opinion, in these 2 years, Pakistan has moved into the right direction.
Perfect. I understand your point. But, you know, people are very impatient about change. I'll give you an example. The middle class, which saw in you an alternative, is the one which is massively affected by the situation now. GDP is shrinking. Inflation is spiking to the point where a kilogram of sugar now has spiked from something like 53 rupees to 85 rupees. I'm talking replicated across all the other basic commodities. These people cannot wait longer to see their living conditions improved.
Hashim, unfortunately, you know, in the dream world, in fairy tales, there are these quick solutions. You have a magic wand and a society changes. In real life, when you want to pick your country up and change direction, it's a struggle. I do not want my country to always keep borrowing for its existence. Pakistan has to change the structure of raising your revenues. It takes reforms. And then cutting down your expenditure, what we've done. Corruption is one of the biggest killers in the society. Today, there is no mega corruption scandal in Pakistan because at the top level, we've controlled it. Problem is still, we have corruption low down the levels, which is again going to be a struggle. We need to take a lot of steps eventually to control corruption at all levels. But it's a struggle. It's not going to happen quickly. And so, reason why we have not been able to clamp down on corruption is because those who come into power and make money, using the power to make money, have never been held accountable. And so this is the first time in our history that the powerful are being held accountable.
Let's move on to COVID-19. The whole world, not only Pakistan, are grappling with the fallout from this pandemic. From June, when people were thinking that this could be a nightmare scenario for Pakistan, to now, where the number of infections seems to be falling down. What happened in between, Mr. Prime Minister?
In Pakistan, we made probably the best decision, very difficult decision. We decided not to have the sort of lockdown that was in Europe or that was in Wuhan in China. We decided to go for a smart lockdown. In other words, concentrate on hotspots and lock them down rather than a blanket lockdown. Because in my opinion, when you have high levels of poverty, when you have daily wages, people who have to earn to feed their families, and in our case, we had almost over half our workforce was informal.
I see your point.
So if we put a lockdown on these people, there was more chance of people starving to death.
We're still talking about domestic issues here, Mr. Prime Minister. I would like to talk about the freedom of speech, which is under attack in your country. I still remember when you said repeatedly in the past, there is absolutely no way that media freedom or freedom of speech would be curtailed under my watch. It's now being curtailed under your watch, Mr. Prime Minister.
Hashim, what is the evidence? Can you just tell me how we are curtailing the freedom of speech?
I'll tell you. International human rights organizations, as well as local organizations, are talking about a trend where journalists, activists, critics have been intimidated, silenced, kidnapped, to the point where they are saying that Pakistan has one of the worst records in the world for enforced disappearances.
In my 2 years in power, tell me how many journalists have been kidnapped in Pakistan?
People are talking about cases of people intimidated.
Hashim, let me answer this. Let me answer. If all I want any independent institution to just in these 2 years in Pakistan do an assessment of freedom of speech as in the papers or as on media, I can tell you that in my country's history, no government has taken such criticism. Criticism I don't mind, but blatant propaganda against a government like it has happened against us.
So do you think these accusations are politically motivated?
Hashim, let me explain. I spent, almost 20 years of my life in England. I know what freedom of speech is. In England, some of the things that have come up in the media against me and my government ministers, had that happened in England, we would have claimed millions of dollars of damages. Unfortunately, it's us, the government and the ministers, who feel unprotected. It's not the media. There is not one instance. Maybe some journalist claimed, we don't even know what the reason was. He was picked up for a few hours. In these 2 years, it's unheard of. What do they call intimidation? I mean, if someone publishes a fake news against the Prime Minister and the Prime Minister then takes him to the court, is that intimidation? It happens anywhere in the world. If the British Prime Minister was subjected to the sort of things that I have been, he would have been now millions of dollars richer because he would have won in the libel cases. I know what libel cases are. If anything, the pendulum has gone the other way. We need protection.
People are asking questions about why senior military officers are taking charge of many major departments in Pakistan when you should have been putting more civilian faces for the international image of your country, Mr. Prime Minister.
What international image? This is a democratic government. We won an election. We challenge anyone to question the election. We ask the opposition, name us any constituencies which you think you didn't get a fair result. We are ready to open them up.
Let me put it this way. How would you describe your relationship with the army's top brass?
I think this is, in our history, we've had a checkered relationship between the civilian and government sometimes. We've obviously had military governments, then we've had civilian governments, where there has been an uneasy relationship. We have an excellent relationship. I honestly think it is the most harmonious relationship. We have complete coordination. We work together. The military completely stands with all the democratic government's policies, whether it is with India, whether it is for peaceful solution in Afghanistan. Everywhere the military stands with us.
Okay, this is going to be time now to talk about regional issues and Afghanistan in particular. You have encouraged all the parties to resume talks. Let me ask you this specific question, Mr. Prime Minister. The ultimate goal of the peace talks is eventually to see peace and stability in Afghanistan. Do you think that the best formula would be a power sharing between the government in Afghanistan and the Taliban?
Look, Hashim, this 19 years of war in Afghanistan has created such divisions in the society. There's been so much bloodshed that for anyone to believe in this utopia that suddenly they will all get together and there'll be peace, I'm afraid it's a very complicated situation. But given the complicated situation, and by the way, I was the one who kept saying that there was never going to be a military solution, that there should be a political solution. Had they listened to me earlier, we probably would have had less complications. The longer this war went, the more the rivalries, the hatred, the divisions, and the more difficult it is to actually sit down together with all the antagonists. But this is the nearest we have got to peace in Afghanistan and a political solution.
But then what's the end game from a Pakistani perspective? What is the end game here from a Pakistani perspective? Would you enjoy or welcome the idea of a power-sharing agreement where the Taliban, along with the political establishment now in Kabul, come together and form a national unity government? Are you in favor of that formula? Yes or no, Mr. Prime Minister?
Hashim, whatever the Afghans think is good for them is good for us.
Okay.
Whatever influence we could use, I honestly think we've tried our best to somehow get the Taliban and Afghanistan government sit on one table. And, this is a miracle that it is actually happening. We pray that this happens. We realize that there are spoilers. I'm afraid there's certainly one country, India, which does not want it to happen.
And this is exactly what I wanted to ask you. You have been always skeptical. I'm talking about of a Pakistani established political elite. They have always been skeptical of the post-Taliban governments based in Kabul. Is it because you feel like they are leaning more towards India? Or that India could take advantage of the situation to create new political realignment?
Well, look, if you were Pakistan, you have a neighbor 7 times bigger than you, and then it starts meddling in the affair of a government which it has no boundaries with. India has no boundary with Afghanistan, but Pakistan has a huge boundary with Afghanistan, and all our relationship with Afghanistan, even before Pakistan came into being, are centuries old. Now, when India starts interfering there, unfortunately, our security forces, our security operators gets worried. It's natural. It would happen to any other country. But we have decided, we in Pakistan have decided, we don't care what India does there, but whatever is good for Afghanistan is good for us. We feel that peace in Afghanistan, after Afghanistan, the other country which has a stake in peace in Afghanistan is Pakistan. Because instability there creates instability on the border regions, what was our former tribal areas, and that affects the whole of our country.
You've been saying basically that you are always open to dialogue with the Indians to end the issues that you've been having with it for many, many decades, particularly the issue of Jammu and Kashmir. Now, it's been now a year since the Indians decided to revoke the special designation of the region, effectively annexing Jammu and Kashmir. Do you have any hopes that with Narendra Modi you can sort it out?
Hashim, look, let me just make it clear. I do not believe in military solutions. I have never believed in military solutions. The moment I became the Prime Minister, I extended a hand of friendship to India. But the tragedy of India, Hashim, is India is being ruled by an extremist. It's an extremist government. It is a Hindu supremacist government inspired by the ideology is inspired by the Nazis. And what I'm saying, the Nazi Germany, what I'm saying, all you have to do is look at the history of RSS, which basically is ruling India now. It was an extremist organization. RSS thrice was outlawed in India as a terrorist organization. They now control 1.3 billion people nuclear armed. That's the tragedy what's happened in India. I know India better than most Pakistanis. It's not just that our neighbors, we are threatened. It's not what they're doing in Kashmir. Hashim, it's for people in India. The sensible, the normal people in India. It's a tragedy for them what is happening there.
But don't you see that Pakistan itself should understand that they cannot continue as a country to see themselves as the victim forever? And just I'll give you a hint here. You've been trying to rally international support. The United Nations Security Council met 3 times about Kashmir. Absolutely no strong sign of solidarity with your country. All symbolic gestures. Don't you feel like you've been abandoned by Western allies?
Hashim, number one, Kashmir is a disputed territory between Pakistan and India since 70 years. Now, this disputed territory on 5th August last year was taken over by India by brute force. 8 million people in Kashmir in an open prison and 800,000 Indian troops in the valley who are now oppressing them. Now, we have knocked all doors and we will keep doing so. We went to I spoke in the United Nations Security Council. I've spoken to the heads of states. This is an extreme injustice, not just for people of Kashmir. If this escalates and if this breaks up into a conflict between Pakistan and India, this has implications for the rest of the world. That's why it's serious. But why the world is not saying anything right now?
This is the problem.
Because, Hashim, listen, Hashim, let me make it clear. No, Hashim, let me make it clear.
Sure.
The reason why the world or certain parts of the world are not responding, because unfortunately, countries worry about their commercial interest. They look upon India as a huge market. And so they are willing to ignore this huge travesty of justice that is taking place there. It doesn't mean that we will sit down quietly and accept this. We will keep trying.
I understand your anger and understand your frustration. Is it the reason why your foreign minister delivered an unprecedented sharp rebuke of the Organization of the Islamic Countries about Kashmir in particular, to the point where the Saudis were really, really angry about what your foreign minister said?
Hashim, first of all, it's not frustration. I believe that countries struggle. Yes, we wanted OIC to take a more front role in this whole thing. Yes, we did. But let me make it clear. Saudi Arabia will always be a friend of Pakistan. But yes, we want OIC to take a bigger role in this whole thing.
You've been definitely following the news recently, and you've seen the declaration of normalization of ties between the United Arab Emirates and Israel, which the Americans said is a breakthrough in the region, and they're looking forward to see many Arab and Muslim nations follow through. What's your take as Prime Minister of Pakistan?
Any one-sided settlement which is going to be imposed on the Palestinians is not going to work, because the issue will never get resolved. And, you know, Israel is in a very strong position right now, probably the strongest it's ever been. It's backed by the United States. But Israel too must recognize this, that if they do not allow Palestinians to have a just settlement, a viable state, this issue is not going to die down. Even if some countries recognize Israel, it's not going to die down. It will just keep festering. It's in Israel's interest that there should be a just settlement.
China, where does the economic corridor stand now? We're talking about an unprecedented mammoth project estimated at something like $62 billion. Many are hoping this is something that could change the face of your country. You've been skeptical about some aspects of it. You wanted to renegotiate some aspects of the deal with the Chinese. Has that been reworked with the Chinese counterpart?
I don't know whether you've come up with these ideas about not being happy or trying to renegotiate. We have, China.
You said that yourself You said that yourself when you were campaigning 2 years ago about the economic corridor and that you want...
Not true. Not true. This is not true. Look, our relationship with China is better than ever before. For us, the way we look at it from Pakistan, our future, economic future, is now linked to China. China is growing at a faster pace than probably any other country. And Pakistan, can really benefit from the way China has developed, the way it has lifted people out of poverty.
When you say China is our future, are you hinting that you are resetting ties with the United States of America, which has been your ally in the 80s and the 90s, and which has always been critical of the deal with China, saying that it could just put you in a debt trap?
Why does it have to be either or? Pakistan doesn't have to be any camp. Every country looks to its own interests. What is best for people of Pakistan? Why can't we have good relationship with everyone? We probably have the best relationship with the United States right now because we are partners in peace in Afghanistan. We did not have such a good relationship a few years back. We have a very good relationship right now. And I do not see why it's either China or the United States.
Mr. Prime Minister, this is going to be my last question to you. If you remember those who voted for you, those who had faith in you, those who saw you as an outsider, not affiliated with the traditional political dynasties of Pakistan, those who had genuine hope that Pakistan tomorrow will look different, modernized, transparent, efficient in terms of economy, and moving forward, departing from the past. Your country, unfortunately, till now, and its political elite in particular, is trapped in a past mindset. And you must agree with me that you have this very small window to change the country. Otherwise, it's going to be too late. Do you have that feeling? Are you concerned about that potential? What are you going to tell the people who are going to vote for you in 2 years from now?
Hashim, I don't look upon Pakistan like the way you're saying you have a small window. I think Pakistan is a country of tremendous potential. The biggest change in Pakistan, if you want to know what is the change in Pakistan, it's the first time in Pakistan we are changing it from an elitist system. Pakistan has what we call elite capture. Unfortunately, Pakistan, the rich kept getting richer and the poor getting poorer. We have changed this whole thing. All our policies, whether it is the construction policy, whether it is the education policy, all our economic policies are aimed at raising people out of poverty. The difference between Pakistan of now and before, our main concentration are the people of Pakistan. Policies aimed at giving them justice, giving them education, a health system. First time we've got health insurance in Pakistan so that the poor people have health insurance. They can not worry about the cost of treatment. These are new changes in Pakistan. One education system, core syllabus, which from next year starts, we had 3-tier systems. So we're changing the way Pakistan will grow.
Imran Khan, Prime Minister of Pakistan, I really appreciate your time. Thank you, and thank you for talking to Al Jazeera.